December 17, 1944. 0530 hours. Honsveld, Belgium. The Tiger tank's engine coughed, sputtered, then died. SS Obersturmbannführer Joachim Paper slammed his fist against the turret hatch, the metallic clang echoing through the pre-dawn darkness. His driver, Unterscharfer Weber, attempted to restart the 700 horsepower Maybach engine. Nothing. The fuel gauge read empty. Herr Obersturmbannführer, Weber called up from his compartment, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. The reserve tank is also dry. Paper climbed down from his command tank, his boots crunching on the frozen Belgian soil. Around him, the most powerful armored spearhead the Wehrmacht had assembled for Operation Wacht im Rhein, the Ardennes offensive, sat motionless. 67 tanks, 149 half-tracks, and nearly 5,000 of Germany's most elite Waffen-SS soldiers, all paralyzed by empty fuel tanks. Through the morning mist, Paper could see the abandoned American position ahead. Honsveld, a critical supply depot for the U.S. 99th Infantry Division. The Americans had fled so quickly they'd left fire still burning in oil drums, coffee still hot in metal cups. And there, lined up like a gift from the god of war himself, stood rows upon rows of jerry cans. Thousands of them. The distinctive olive-drab American fuel containers, stacked 3 meters high, extending perhaps 200 meters in every direction. Paper approached slowly, almost reverently. His adjutant, Hauptsturmführer Hans Groll, pried open one can and sniffed. Benzin, Herr Obersturmbannführer. High-octane gasoline. As his men began the frantic work of refueling their vehicles, Paper walked among the stockpile, counting. The mathematics were staggering. 50,000 gallons. Enough to fuel his entire Kampfgruppe for the push to the Meuse River. Enough to potentially change the course of the offensive. The Americans had abandoned more fuel in this single depot than most German divisions had received in the past 6 months. But as Paper stood among this bounty, watching his men pour American fuel into German tanks, a crushing realization settled over him like the morning fog. If the Americans could afford to abandon such quantities, if they could leave behind what Germany would guard with entire divisions, then this war was already over. Germany hadn't just miscalculated. Germany had fundamentally misunderstood the nature of its enemy. To understand the weight of this moment, you need to understand Joachim Paper. At 29, he was one of the youngest regimental commanders in the Waffen-SS, holder of the Knight's Cross with oak leaves and swords. A veteran of the Eastern Front who had learned that in modern warfare, fuel was more precious than ammunition, more valuable than the best tactical position, more decisive than superior training. Paper wasn't a Nazi true believer in the ideological sense. He was a pragmatist, a professional soldier who had risen through merit in a system that rewarded ruthless competence. His men respected him not because of his politics, but because he kept them alive through calculated aggression and meticulous planning. Which is why what happened next devastated him so completely. Among the jerry cans, Sergeant Wilhelm Hoffmann found something that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Shipping manifests in the depot office. Hoffmann could read English. He'd worked in his father's import business before the war. The papers indicated this fuel had been shipped from Texas to New York, across the Atlantic to Liverpool, across the Channel to Normandy, and trucked 400 miles to Honsveld. The journey, over 6,000 miles. The time elapsed, less than 6 weeks. I showed the papers to Obersturmbannführer Paper, Hoffmann recalled in a 1976 interview, his voice still shaken 3 decades later. He read them twice, then crumpled them up. He said nothing, but his face went pale. We both understood what this meant. Private Ernst Keller found a stack of Stars and Stripes newspapers dated December 15, just 2 days old. The headline celebrated the opening of a new fuel pipeline from Cherbourg to Verdun, capable of delivering 300,000 gallons per day. A single pipeline delivering more fuel daily than Kampfgruppe Paper would use in the entire offensive. Paper stood there in the December cold, holding an American newspaper, surrounded by more fuel than he'd seen in 2 years, and realized he was reading his own obituary. The fuel crisis Germany tried to hide. 6 months before Paper's discovery at Honsveld, in June 1944, Albert Speer, Hitler's Minister of Armaments and War Production, had presented the Führer with a report that should have ended all offensive operations immediately. Germany's synthetic fuel production, the lifeblood of the Wehrmacht, had been systematically destroyed by Allied bombing. The Luna Works, which had produced 175,000 tons of fuel in April, managed only 5,000 tons by September. The Bergius hydrogenation plants at Politz, Blechhammer, and Brucks were operating at less than 10% capacity. The numbers told a story of inevitable defeat. In 1944, the United States produced 1.8 billion barrels of crude oil. Germany, including all synthetic production and captured Romanian fields, managed 33 million barrels. Less than 2% of American production. The Third Reich was attempting to wage mechanized warfare with horse-drawn logistics, while America was drowning its armies in petroleum abundance. The technology gap. But it wasn't just about quantity. The quality difference was equally damning. American refineries had perfected catalytic cracking, a process that broke down heavy crude oil into lighter, more useful fractions with unprecedented efficiency. A barrel of Texas crude could yield 45% gasoline using this method. German synthetic fuel production from coal, using the Fischer-Tropsch or Bergius processes, was far less efficient. It required enormous amounts of coal, water, and electricity to produce fuel that was, gallon for gallon, inferior to what came naturally from American oil wells. The Americans were producing 100-octane aviation fuel as a standard product. German aircraft, designed around 87-octane synthetic fuel, couldn't take full advantage of captured American fuel without engine modifications. It was like finding premium champagne when you'd been drinking watered-down beer. Your system couldn't even process the upgrade properly. And there was another factor that German planners had completely failed to account for: the resilience of the American supply chain. When Allied bombers destroyed the Luna Works in May 1944, German synthetic fuel production collapsed and never recovered. The facilities were too complex, too specialized, too dependent on specific components that couldn't be replaced. When German U-boats sank American tankers in the Atlantic, and they sank dozens, it barely registered in American fuel availability. The United States had so much surplus refining capacity that losing a few percentage points of transport capability was merely inconvenient. Captain James Forrestal, who would later become Secretary of the Navy, wrote in his diary, "We are producing so much petroleum that our primary challenge is finding enough ships to transport it all. The Germans are sinking our tankers and we're building them faster than they can destroy them." The plan that ignored reality. Major Friedrich Simon of the Wehrmacht's Logistics Command had calculated that the Ardennes offensive would require 4.5 million gallons of fuel to reach Antwerp. Hitler allocated 5 million gallons, seemingly a comfortable margin. But only 2.5 million gallons were actually delivered to forward units due to transportation problems. The German High Command was betting the entire offensive on capturing enemy supplies, a strategy that revealed terminal weakness rather than strength. The Americans, meanwhile, had constructed a petroleum pipeline system across France. Operation Pluto, pipeline under the ocean, and the Red Ball Express, a massive truck convoy system, delivered 12,500 tons of supplies daily to the front lines. By December 1944, American forces in Europe were consuming 1.2 million gallons of fuel per day, and receiving 1.4 million gallons. They were accumulating reserves while fighting. The American side, abundance as strategy. First Lieutenant Robert McDonald, a logistics officer with the U.S. First Army, kept a detailed diary throughout the war. His December 15th entry, 2 days before paper's discovery, reads, "Fuel convoy arrived today. Third one this week. We're running out of places to store it all." Colonel Jenkins joked we should start using jerry cans as sandbags. Nobody laughed. We actually considered it. We have so much fuel that our biggest problem is preventing evaporation loss from the cans sitting in the sun. This wasn't arrogance. It was simply the reality of American industrial capacity applied to warfare. The United States had spent the 1930s perfecting mass production techniques. The assembly line, interchangeable parts, economies of scale. When Pearl Harbor was attacked, America didn't invent a new system. It simply pointed the existing one at war production. By 1944, American factories were producing one aircraft every 5 minutes, one tank every 7 minutes, one ship every day. But perhaps most importantly, one barrel of refined petroleum every 0.02 seconds. Think about that. In the time it takes you to blink, American refineries were producing a barrel of oil. Colonel James Snyder, Chief Logistics Officer for the First Army, recorded on December 18th. Fuel receipts yesterday, 1,847,000 gallons. Fuel issued, 1,623,000 gallons. Net gain to reserves, 224,000 gallons. Current reserve status, 3.7 million gallons. Assessment, comfortable margin for all planned operations. While Snyder was writing about comfortable margins, Joachim Paper was 40 miles away, counting individual jerry cans like a miser counting gold coins. The briefing that predicted failure. December 14, 1944. 2 days before the offensive. Paper attended the final briefing at Tondorf. General Sepp Dietrich, commanding the 6th SS Panzer Army, was blunt. "You will have enough fuel to reach the Meuse, if you capture American supplies." Read that again. If you capture American supplies. The entire German strategy wasn't, "We will defeat the enemy." It was, "We will defeat the enemy by stealing their resources while we fight them." The fuel allocation for Kampfgruppe Paper, 31,000 gallons. The distance to the Meuse, 65 miles. Fuel consumption for Paper's column in combat conditions, approximately 50 miles of operations. The mathematics of failure were built into the plan from the beginning. As his column prepared to advance on December 16, Paper issued strict orders. Tanks would operate in single file to conserve fuel. Engines would be shut off during any halt longer than 5 minutes. The capture of American fuel dumps was priority 1, above even tactical objectives. Think about that last order. Capturing fuel was more important than capturing strategic positions, more important than eliminating enemy strong points, more important than achieving tactical surprise. The German offensive wasn't a military operation. It was a heist. The contrast. That same morning, Captain James Rose of the U.S. 743rd Tank Battalion, stationed just 20 miles from Paper's starting position, recorded in his unit diary. Received fuel resupply, 8,000 gallons. Third delivery this week. Storage tanks already at capacity. Requested permission to refuse additional fuel convoy. Request denied. First Army Logistics insists on maintaining delivery schedule regardless of current reserves. One side was fighting to steal fuel. The other side couldn't physically accept all the fuel being delivered to them. The offensive begins. December 16, 1944. 0530 hours. The German artillery barrage that opened Operation Wacht am Rhein used more ammunition in 2 hours than the Wehrmacht had allocated for entire operations earlier in the war. But even this impressive display masked critical shortages. Paper's column began moving at 7 a.m., already behind schedule. The roads, which on German maps appeared as highways, were narrow country lanes, many unpaved. Within hours, traffic jams developed as vehicles designed for the Russian steppes struggled through the Ardennes forest. At Lanzerath, Paper's first objective, they encountered unexpected resistance from a single American intelligence and reconnaissance platoon. 18 men who held up the most powerful German armored column for nearly 10 hours. During the delay, Paper's vehicles sat idling, burning precious fuel. When they finally broke through and reached Hansfeld at dawn on December 17, Paper's column had covered 20 miles and consumed 40% of their fuel. At this rate, they would run dry before reaching the halfway point to the Meuse, the depot that changed everything. The American supply depot at Hansfeld wasn't even a primary facility. It was a forward supply point for the 99th Infantry Division, what the U.S. Army classified as a Class 3B depot, a temporary fuel station. Yet what Paper found there exceeded the monthly fuel allocation for an entire German panzer division. Hauptsturmführer Hans Gruhl later testified. "We found pyramids of jerry cans, each containing 5 gallons of gasoline. They were stacked 3 meters high, extending for perhaps 200 meters. The Americans had not even attempted to destroy them. Just left them. As if they were worthless." The captured fuel was high-octane aviation gasoline mixed with motor fuel, 80 octane or higher. German vehicles, especially the temperamental Maybach engines and the Tiger tanks, were designed for 74 octane fuel. The American gasoline was actually too good, causing engine problems in several German vehicles. It was like feeding premium racing fuel to a tractor engine. The moment of clarity. As Paper's men refueled, they made more discoveries that shattered their understanding of the war. Private First Class Ernst Keller found what he thought was a ration depot. Inside were cases of chocolate bars, canned fruit, cigarettes, luxuries German soldiers hadn't seen in years. But this wasn't a special depot. According to the inventory sheets, this was a standard weekly ration delivery for one American company. One company. 150 men. Receiving more luxury items than a German regiment of 3,000 men would see in 6 months. Gefreiter Heinrich Maurer found a maintenance shed with spare tank parts, neatly organized and labeled in English. "We counted 20 complete sets of Sherman tank road wheels," he recalled in a 1982 interview. Complete sets. Just sitting there as spares. "We would have stripped those wheels from destroyed tanks and used them until they fell apart." The Americans had so many they kept complete spare sets at a forward depot. But the most devastating discovery was made by Sergeant Wilhelm Hoffmann, who found a notice board in what appeared to be the American unit's office. It was a fuel consumption report for the week of December 10-16th, 1944. The 99th Infantry Division had consumed 47,000 gallons that week. The report noted this was below average due to reduced training exercises and vehicle maintenance schedule. Below average. Paper's entire Kampfgruppe had been allocated 31,000 gallons for the most important offensive operation of the war. This single American infantry division, not even an armored division, had casually used 47,000 gallons in 1 week of routine operations, and considered it below average. "That's when I knew," Hoffmann said in his 1976 interview, his voice still hollow with the memory. "That's when I knew we had already lost. Not because they were better soldiers, they weren't. Not because they had better weapons, they didn't always. But because they had so much of everything that they measured success by how much they didn't use." The push continues. With the 50,000 gallons captured at Hansfeld, Paper's column surged forward. They reached Bühlingen by noon on December 17th, capturing additional supplies, rations, ammunition, and most importantly, maps showing other American fuel depots in the area. But the maps revealed a disturbing truth. The Americans had fuel stockpiles everywhere. Every major crossroads had a depot. Every town had a supply point. The U.S. First Army alone had 3.5 million gallons in reserve, scattered across dozens of locations. It was like discovering your enemy's spare change exceeded your entire national treasury. Paper pushed on to Ligneville, where his forces would commit the Malmedy massacre, killing 84 American prisoners. Even this war crime was connected to fuel desperation. Paper later claimed he could not spare gasoline to transport prisoners to rear areas, nor could he spare men to guard them. The massacre would eventually lead to Paper's conviction for war crimes. But in that moment, on December 17, 1944, Paper was focused on one thing: reaching the next fuel depot before his tanks stopped running. By evening, his spearhead reached Stavelot, site of a major American fuel depot containing over 2 million gallons. Here was enough fuel to guarantee reaching the Meuse. Enough to make the entire offensive successful. Enough to potentially change the course of the war. But as the first German vehicles approached, American engineers were already at work. The decision to burn millions. Captain John Brewster of the 291st Engineer Combat Battalion had received warning of the German approach. His orders were simple: deny fuel to the enemy at all costs. The Stavelot depot contained 2,189,000 gallons of gasoline in jerry cans stacked across 15 acres. Think about that volume. 2 million gallons. If you poured it all at once, it would fill an Olympic swimming pool. At 1,630 hours on December 17th, as Paper's advance guard approached the town, Captain Brewster gave the order. Engineers poured gasoline trails between the stacks. White phosphorus grenades were distributed. Technical Sergeant Paul Hinkle threw the first grenade. The explosion was immediate and tremendous, he recalled. A wall of fire shot up, maybe 100 feet high. The heat hit us from 200 yards away. Within minutes, the entire depot was an inferno. Paper's lead tanks arrived to find a pillar of black smoke rising 1,000 feet into the sky. The fire would burn for 3 days, consuming enough fuel to have powered Paper's entire division to Antwerp and back. Captain Brewster wrote in his after-action report, "The decision to destroy 2.1 million gallons was tactically necessary but psychologically difficult. My men were visibly shaken, not by the enemy but by the waste. Several soldiers asked if we could save some for our own use. I had to explain that we had adequate reserves and that denying this fuel to the enemy was worth more than its value to us." Private First Class Michael Torres, one of the engineers who lit the fire later said. I grew up in Depression-era Texas. My family scraped by. We counted every penny, saved every scrap. And here I was, burning enough gasoline to run every car in my hometown for a decade. It felt wrong even though I knew it was right. One of the guys was crying while he lit his section. Not from fear. From waste. But for Unterstürzler Weber, paper's driver who watched from the approaching German column, the meaning was entirely different. The Obersturmbannführer stood on his tank turret, watching the flames. He said nothing for perhaps 5 minutes. Then he climbed down and told me, they can afford to burn 2 million gallons to deny them to us. They can afford to burn more than we were given for the entire offensive. What are we doing here? The scorched earth strategy. Stavelot wasn't an isolated incident. Across the Ardennes, American engineers were destroying fuel dumps rather than risk capture. At Troisponts, 1.1 million gallons burned. At Spa, 2.5 million gallons destroyed. At numerous smaller depots, hundreds of thousands more gallons. In total, Americans deliberately destroyed over 8 million gallons during the first week of the offensive. 8 million gallons. More than Germany had allocated for the entire operation. More than most German army groups received in a month. Burnt. Destroyed. Rendered useless. The ability to casually destroy millions of gallons was rooted in a supply system beyond German comprehension. The Red Ball Express. The Red Ball Express had delivered 412,000 tons of supplies using 6,000 trucks operating round the clock. Each truck consumed 40 gallons daily just to move supplies. The operation itself, just the logistics operation, burned more fuel than German Army Group B received monthly for combat operations. By December 1944, the Motor Transport Service employed 230 truck companies operating on color-coded routes. Red Ball, White Ball, Green Diamond ABC routes. The system delivered 20,000 tons of supplies daily, including 3,000 tons of fuel. The mathematics were insane. America was burning fuel to deliver fuel and still had surplus. Colonel James Snyder, Chief Logistics Officer for 1st Army, recorded on December 18. Fuel receipts yesterday, 1,847,000 gallons. Fuel issued, 1,623,000 gallons. Fuel destroyed due to enemy proximity, 2,200,000 gallons. Net change to reserves, minus 1,976,000 gallons. Current reserves, 3.8 million gallons. Assessment, adequate for all operations. No restrictions on consumption necessary. They had destroyed nearly 2 million gallons and still maintained adequate reserves. The pipeline system. The destruction of fuel depots, as devastating as it was psychologically, barely impacted American operations because of Operation Pluto and the pipeline network. Operation Pluto had laid pipes across the English Channel, pumping 1 million gallons daily from Britain to France. A network of pipelines extended inland. The Cherbourg-Paris line, 800,000 gallons daily. The Seine line, 650,000 gallons daily. Dozens of smaller pipelines feeding forward depots. By December 1944, Allied forces in Northwest Europe were consuming 7.5 million gallons daily, while receiving 8.2 million gallons. They were building reserves during offensive operations. They were stockpiling while fighting. For German commanders who had spent 3 years calculating whether they could spare 10 liters for a reconnaissance patrol, this was incomprehensible. Paper's desperate push. As paper pushed deeper into Belgium on December 18, the impossibility of the German position became mathematically certain. At Chenoz they captured another depot, 5,000 gallons. Consumed in 3 hours of combat. The Tiger tanks consumed 2.5 gallons per mile in battle. Panthers burned 1.5 gallons per mile. In the difficult Ardennes terrain with constant maneuvering and idling, consumption increased by 40%. Hauptmann Otto Dingler, maintenance officer for the 1st SS Panzer Regiment, recorded, "By noon on December 18, we had consumed 67,000 gallons since the offensive began. We had captured perhaps 55,000 gallons. We were operating at a deficit, burning through reserves. Every kilometer forward meant we'd need to go further just to find enough fuel to retreat." The Americans, monitoring German radio traffic through ultra-intercepts, knew paper's fuel situation in real time. General Courtney Hodges ordered all units, Enemy forces critically short of fuel. Destroy all gasoline stocks threatened by capture. Denial of fuel to enemy is paramount operational priority. That same day, American C-47s flew 316 sorties delivering supplies to surrounded Bastogne, including 160,000 gallons of fuel. The Americans were flying more fuel to a surrounded garrison than Paper's entire Kampfgruppe possessed. Flying it through the air to a surrounded town, while Paper's tanks ran dry attacking that same town. The final trap. By December 19, as Paper's forces engaged American defenders at Stoumont, the fuel crisis had become critical. Tanks were being abandoned not from battle damage, but from empty fuel tanks. Paper consolidated his remaining fuel, perhaps 8,000 gallons total, enough for one final engagement or a fighting retreat, but not both. Meanwhile, Allied planners were already looking past the Ardennes. Brigadier General Maurice Gilland requested 24.5 million gallons for January operations. The request was approved without discussion. On December 20th, Paper received his final radio message regarding fuel. Fuel convoy destroyed by Allied aircraft. No resupply possible. Continue mission with available resources. Paper called his commanders together. Sturmbannführer Werner Pochk was blunt. We have fuel for perhaps 20 kilometers. The Meuse is 30 kilometers away. We cannot reach the objective. According to Hauptsturmführer Grüll's testimony, Obersturmbannführer Paper said, "Gentlemen, we have discovered we are fighting an enemy who burns more fuel to deny it to us than we received for this entire operation. What we captured at Hansfeld, which seemed miraculous, was nothing to them. A rounding error. We cannot win this. We could not have won this. Germany has been fighting a war it lost before it began." The final stand. By December 21st, Paper was surrounded at La Gleize, his tanks immobile. The American forces surrounding him, elements of the 30th Infantry Division, 82nd Airborne and 3rd Armored Division, had a combined fuel allocation of 340,000 gallons for December 21st alone. Paper had perhaps 1,000 gallons remaining. Private First Class Richard McKinney of the 30th Infantry Division wrote home, "We've got Germans surrounded who ran out of gas. Can you believe it? Ran out of gas. Our captain jokes that we use more fuel heating coffee than they have for their tanks. The war's over, they just don't know it yet." But the Germans did know it. That was the horror. On the night of December 23rd to 24th, Paper made his decision. He would abandon all vehicles and escape on foot with as many men as possible. Of 119 tanks and assault guns that began the offensive, 39 remained operational, but immobilized for lack of fuel. These were destroyed with their remaining ammunition. Oberstfreiter Heinz Goltz described the scene. "We drained the last fuel from all vehicles, maybe 200 gallons total. The Obersturmbannführer personally destroyed his command tank. He placed demolition charges, stood back and watched it explode. Millions of Reichsmarks of equipment, destroyed by empty fuel tanks. Not by American guns. By mathematics. Of 5,000 men who began the offensive with Kampfgruppe Paper, approximately 770 returned to German lines. They had advanced 60 miles, captured several depots, fought dozens of engagements, and discovered the truth about industrial warfare. The knowledge spreads. News of Paper's discoveries spread rapidly through German command. On December 26, Field Marshal Walter Model received detailed reports on captured American supplies and destroyed depots. His chief of staff recorded Model's reaction. The field marshal read the quantities twice. 50,000 gallons captured at Hansfeld. 2 million burned at Stavelot. 8 million destroyed rather than risk capture. He was quiet for a long moment, then said, "We are not fighting the same war. We never were." Hitler, informed on December 28, refused to accept reality. Speer wrote. Hitler insisted the numbers were propaganda. When shown photographs of the burning Stavelot depot, he claimed it was Hollywood special effects. He said the Americans would never destroy their own supplies. It proved they were weak, panicking. He understood nothing. But the lower ranks understood perfectly. Gefreiter Wilhelm Hoffmann wrote to his wife. The letter was intercepted by Allied censors. Americans destroy more fuel daily than we receive monthly. They drive tanks like we would drive bicycles, casually, without thought. They have so much that waste means nothing to them. This war is lost. was always lost. We were just too proud to see it. The numbers that tell the story. Let me give you perspective that even the soldiers at the time didn't fully grasp. The fuel crisis in the Ardennes was symptomatic of a larger, insurmountable reality. By 1944, the United States produced 50% of the world's total manufacturing output. One aircraft every 5 minutes. One ship every day. One tank every 7 minutes. One barrel of oil every 0.02 seconds. Petroleum production in 1944. United States, 1.8 billion barrels. Soviet Union, 110 million barrels. Germany, including synthetic, 33 million barrels. Japan, 2.6 million barrels. The Axis powers combined produced less than 2% of American petroleum. Not 20%. Not even 10%. Less than 2%. Every major German offensive after 1942 had been constrained by fuel, not by lack of will, not by poor tactics, but by simple mathematics. Every American offensive was supported by abundance that German planners literally could not conceive. Lieutenant Colonel Chester Hansen recorded a revealing incident on December 27. A logistics officer reported that weather had reduced fuel deliveries to only 500,000 gallons daily. There was momentary concern until someone noted that this exceeded Germany's total allocation for the entire Ardennes offensive. We laughed. It seemed absurd. But it was true. The psychological collapse. German POWs from the Ardennes were universally more shocked by American abundance than by American firepower. Seeing GIs discard half-eaten rations, use gasoline to heat water for shaving, or leave equipment behind because it was easier to get new supplies than repair old ones. This shattered German morale more effectively than artillery. Oberstleutnant Rüdiger von Reichelm told his interrogators, "We knew your production numbers abstractly. We were briefed on American industrial capacity. But seeing your soldiers casually waste more than we possessed, that made it real. Every German soldier who saw your casual abundance knew the war was hopeless. You could have defeated us with waste alone." This knowledge spread through letters despite censorship. Feldwebel Ernst Muller wrote, "Americans wash clothes in gasoline. They use it like water. They feed chocolate to their dogs. They fire artillery for practice, for Christmas celebrations. We cannot fight infinity. You cannot defeat mathematics with courage." The psychological impact undermined Nazi racial superiority narratives at their core. How could the decadent Americans possess such wealth while the master race scraped for necessities? How could racial inferiors outproduce the superior Aryan civilization by factors of 50 to 1? The contradictions were impossible to reconcile. And so the entire ideological framework began to collapse, unit by unit, soldier by soldier, as they encountered American abundance firsthand. The verdict of history. During the Nuremberg trials, German leaders consistently cited logistics, particularly fuel, as the decisive factor in Germany's defeat. Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel testified, "We had operational superiority from 1940 to 1941. We had better trained soldiers, better tactics, better commanders through 1943. By 1944, none of it mattered. We couldn't move forces for lack of fuel while Americans moved entire armies like chess pieces. You cannot fight a war of movement when you cannot move." Joachim Paper, tried for the Malmedy massacre, offered revealing testimony about the fuel situation. Every decision after December 17 was influenced by fuel shortage. We couldn't maneuver to exploit breakthroughs. We couldn't pursue defeated enemies. We couldn't even retreat effectively. American forces moved freely while we counted leaders. The trial focuses on Malmedy, but the real crime was sending us to fight a war that mathematics had already decided. General Heinz Guderian, the architect of German armored warfare, wrote in his memoir, "When Paper captured 50,000 gallons at Hansfeld, meaning everything to him but nothing to the Americans, the war was already over. We just didn't have the courage to admit it." Epilogue. The meaning of abundance, 58:00-60:00. The story of Joachim Paper and the 50,000 gallons resonates because it represents the moment when industrial warfare reached its logical conclusion. Wars between industrial powers would be won by production statistics, not warrior courage. The romantic notion of warfare, where skill, bravery and tactical genius could overcome material disadvantage, died in the Ardennes among empty fuel tanks and burning depots. Dr. Richard Overy calculated that by 1944 Allied to Axis production ratios exceeded 5-1 in most major categories. In petroleum it approached 50:1. These were advantages that could not be overcome by superior training, better tactics, or more experienced commanders. December 24, 1944. As Paper's men slipped through American lines on foot, abandoning 39 tanks, 70 half-tracks, and 177 other vehicles, all operational, all abandoned solely for lack of fuel, the magnitude crystallized. They had captured 50,000 gallons, which had seemed miraculous, only to learn it was meaningless to an enemy who could burn millions without strategic consequence. Unterstützungsführer Weber reflected in 1975. That morning at Hansfeld, finding American fuel, we celebrated like we'd won the lottery. By evening, learning about Stavelot burning, we understood we'd already lost everything. Americans had so much they could destroy what we would die to possess. How do you fight that? You don't. You can't. The reunion. In 1984, 40 years after the battle, veterans gathered at La Glise. The museum there displays one of Paper's Tiger tanks, still positioned where it ran out of fuel on December 23, 1944. Former Unterstützungsführer Karl Wertmann stood beside the tank with former Staff Sergeant Roy Anderson of the 30th Infantry Division, who had helped surround Paper's force. "We always wondered why you stopped there," Anderson said. "We thought it was a tactical position. Turns out." Wertmann laughed, but there was no humor in it. "We stopped because the tanks were empty. You burned millions of gallons to keep them from us. How could we fight that? How do you fight an enemy that has so much they can destroy it just to spite you?" Anderson was quiet for a moment. "We never knew you were that short. We had so much fuel we never even thought about it. It was just there. Always there." That, Wertmann said, was exactly the problem. The final truth. The Battle of the Bulge killed 19,000 Americans and perhaps 100,000 Germans. It destroyed the Wehrmacht's last reserves of men and material. But its lasting impact was spreading the knowledge through German ranks that America possessed abundance beyond comprehension. Joachim Paper survived the war. He was imprisoned until 1956 for war crimes at Malmedy. On July 14, 1976, he was murdered at his home in France by unknown assailants, likely revenge for his wartime actions. But in 1967, he had told historian Henry Moll, "Finding that depot at Hansfeld was the worst thing that could have happened to us. If we'd run out of fuel earlier, we might have retreated with some dignity, some illusions intact. Instead, we discovered that Americans had oceans while we had drops. We discovered the impossibility of our situation. We discovered we'd been dead men since 1941, just too stupid to stop moving." The lesson extends far beyond World War II. In industrial warfare between peer powers, logistics supersedes strategy. Production overwhelms tactics. Abundance defeats dedication. The German soldier of 1944 was arguably better trained, more experienced, more tactically sophisticated than his American counterpart. It didn't matter. Americans were backed by an industrial machine that could waste more than Germany could produce. This truth was encoded in every jerry can at Hansfeld, every gallon burned at Stavelot, every pipeline pumping across France. Wars between industrial nations are won by factories and refineries, not by brilliant generals or brave soldiers. The Tiger tank still sits in the museum at La Glise, its fuel gauge reading empty. A monument to the day mathematics defeated courage, when abundance overwhelmed skill, when industrial capacity proved more decisive than tactical genius. Visitors still ask the same question: why would they abandon such powerful tanks? The answer is simple, devastating, and final: no fuel.